Hello everyone, this is Patrick, Henz and Ganna Pogrebna with Data-Driven Formula One. And today we're talking about exciting politics, or rather boring politics in an exciting way.
Yeah, at least we hope it's exciting for you. It's an important topic which we will see. It's starting maybe in the last year of the 70s. We see it for a long time in the 1980s. So we wanted to do a special edition on that topic to understand a little bit better what happened behind the scenes. As it's quite relevant and also quite relevant if you see the sport today, as it's based on the decisions which have been taken in the 1980s.
Yes, and we decided to call this episode the FISA FOCA dispute, but really it's usually referred to as FISA FOCA war.
That's
so
that's right, but let's say to keep our feet on the ground. I mean, people are not killing each other. There had been strong discussions. Maybe some topics you may have ethical concerns, but it's not a war, and that's why we call it a dispute.
Well, I think we will find out whether the people are killing each other or not. I think that's a debatable point. But let's get to it. And perhaps I think the first thing that we need to explain to people what is FISA and what is FOCA, because for those who didn't see our 1979 episode, this probably will be a surprise.
Exactly. And besides the politics, there have been a lot of fascinating characters involved in the discussions, but also responsible for FISA and FOCA. So FISA means Fédération Internationale du Sport Automobile, coming from France, where it's practically developed historically since the beginning of the 20th century. So it's a very French organization. In opposite to the FOCA, which is a very British organization, and maybe we come to this later, as it may also have an impact until today, as was it last year, where Alfonso said that non-British drivers have a strong disadvantage or not allowed to win or whatever. So we have this somehow underlying as maybe until today. So FOCA means Formula One Constructors Association, which have been, let's say, the independent team, while in FISA had been the official manufacturers like Renault, Ferrari, and Alfa Romeo, which had, of course, sometimes different goals. As a big manufacturer, you see the sport maybe a little bit more from a marketing point to communicate the superiority of your products, while the smaller teams had been independent companies, and they had been depending to make money out of the competition inside Formula One. So different goals, different situations where you're coming from. And of course, this had to lead to the discussions.
Yeah, we need to say that basically a lot of people, I think, are usually confused about FISA because they think that this is some sort of like a separate entity from FIA, but actually these are very linked. It's like a wing of FIA.
Yes.
So originally, I just want to explain that in 1922, FIA emerged, Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, FIA. So we have this organization since 1922, and then they decided that they're going to delegate race organization to a different organization that was called CSI, right? The Commission Sportive Internationale. I do apologize. So CSI. And in 1978, it was renamed FISA. So FISA is basically kind of like a wing of FIA, right? And FOCA, like Patrick explained, that's a kind of a new organization that emerged. Well, I think Bernie Ecclestone was probably the main driving force behind it. And we will explain to you what the dispute was about. But as you can imagine, like most disputes, it was about money and power.
Yeah, surprise.
Yeah, that's right. So let's have a look.
So here we see a short resume. It started in the early 1980s. I mean, as you see later, I would say we also saw it in 1979. So a dispute broke out between the FIA and the FOCA over revenue from Formula One races. Since 20 Formula One teams were now taking part in the World Championship, and by the way, the sports is becoming each year more and more expensive for the teams. So it's getting much more a business. We are not in the 1950s or in the 1960s anymore, where we have small garage teams. So 1980s, we are speaking in most of the cases of highly professional teams, which have internal structures, have to pay salaries, etc., etc. So it's teams already quite professionally, like companies organized.
Right.
Also,
so I just want to also say that it also had to do with the broadcasting rights.
you're right.
Because as we explained again with Patrick, we had like through the 50s and the 60s, we've explained that, you know, as soon as we had televised races, we could talk about additional revenues. So this is why we had advertisement revenues. And actually, you know, there was a big question about who benefits from the broadcasting. And essentially, this became a big issue in this FISA FOCA conflict. And well, as we know, with Bernie Ecclestone's, the majority of Bernie Ecclestone's fortune comes from broadcasting revenues. You can already kind of imagine who kind of won that particular part of the dispute, but it has recently been looked at again, right? So it's a constant war. So there is a constant war on about the revenue from broadcasting, because it's a big, excuse me, it's a big chunk of revenue. You know, everyone wants to. It's. I'm not gonna say everyone, but many people around the world are watching Formula One. And it's a big market, and obviously, you know, you want to know who benefits from it and how the profits are divided.
That's right. So that's what it's all about. Besides this, slowly starting license through merchandising, computer games. So a lot of money to earn, and everybody wanted to be sure that they get their fair part out of it.
Yeah, and I just want to say that the FOCA obviously, you know, received this business of broadcasting, and they demanded quite a handsome fee from organizers to do this, to be able to enter Formula One. So this was also part of the important part of this dispute.
Exactly. So let's have a short view on the two organizations. Ganna already described it. What is FISA? It started from the 1922 Commission Sportive Internationale in France, and due to this, is quite a French continental Europe organization. It's a famous president since its since it became the FISA. First of all, Jean-Marie Balestre from 78 to 91. So even if there had been quite a number of scandals, including his political involvement in younger years, he stayed quite a long time in power. And after this, Max Mosley followed him, as originally he was more on the FOCA side, but then he became president of the FISA in early 90s. Also, he with some scandals around him. So quite fascinating characters, and members here are Alfa Romeo as they re-entered in 79, Ferrari, and Renault as they re-entered in 78. So here we have the manufacturers, and I think also relevant here, 3 companies from continental Europe, and not British teams as in FOCA, as traditional teams developed, let's say in the late 50s, beginning of 60s in the UK. They grow, and today, I mean, most important teams are still in UK. So we have the relevant members: Ken Tyrrell, Frank Williams, Colin Chapman, and Bernie Ecclestone.
Yeah, I just want to say that, again, let's just for a moment talk about money. So originally we had FISA rather managing the sort of the, like we explained in different episodes with Patrick. So there is obviously prize money that we have for the races, and there is also this huge revenues from advertisement and broadcasting. So, and originally when broadcasting was quite small, obviously, you know, FOCA wasn't that strong. But then when broadcasting became really a thing, like a lot of people were watching, you know, a lot of was a significant advertisement benefits from broadcasting for Formula One. These 2 entities really became, like, financially, FISA, that was kind of managing the prize fund, and FOCA that was managing the broadcasting side of things. They really became sort of equivalent beasts, and they started to kind of have these tensions over power and money.
That's right. So it was money, and of course, as FISA was a little bit nearer to FIA, most FOCA teams had been also afraid that FIA had somehow a bias on big manufacturers, as they tried, of course, to get more manufacturers inside the sport to get more attention. And of course, if you would have more manufacturers, this would have a negative impact on the power which have the smaller FOCA teams.
Yeah, and FOCA teams actually, FOCA itself was also arguing that the prize money is split unfairly, right? So with the majority of, it doesn't basically, for example, the argument was that it doesn't matter how Ferrari performs, they always win, they always have some funds at the end of the day.
Right,
whereas,
until today, yes.
Yeah, whereas the smaller teams, they don't enjoy the same benefits. And, you know, it was kind of like some of these arguments could be fair, but of course there was the other side of broadcasting where, again, that's really unevenly split. So kind of from both sides, it wasn't very fair situation for everybody.
That's right. It was, sometimes it became quite dirty. So again, a little bit historic background. The organizers of the individual races, for example, many times the local automotive clubs, like in Germany, for example, the ADAC, they're responsible for accepting entries, paying prize money, and the general running for each event. In Formula One, this leads to tension between the teams, which forms themselves into the FOCA and CSI, as we discussed. And also an important point, the FIA and the CSI, they have been largely amateur organizations, while the FOCA had been controlled by the heads of the different teams. So even if there had been maybe smaller, I think they had been much more professionally organized than the FISA side, which maybe helped also to come to the outcome, which I think gave more strengths away from the manufacturers to the FOCA teams.
Yeah, that's right. And again, this has to do with, if you are the race organizer, again, your profits mostly are coming from the broadcasting side.
Yes.
Therefore, if I'm an owner of a circuit, I need to make sure that the race is broadcast, and for that I need to go and talk to FOCA. And then the prize money is managed by, and the rules and everything else is managed by FISA, right? So, and obviously because the broadcasting was such a big deal and such a big driver of the revenue in the sport, especially we saw that in the late 1970s and 1980s when the broadcasting really started to pick up. So all of a sudden there is this kind of a power struggle, right, with one entity basically controlling how much you're gonna make as a circuit owner, and the other organization actually driving the rules and prize money and all that. So you can see that it's actually, so basically the mistake I think that FISA made at the beginning was giving up this broadcasting rights. So if they said we're gonna control the broadcasting, we wouldn't have had this power struggle at all.
That's correct. I mean, by the way, Ganna found some great photos from the times, which really brings us back to the beginning of the 1980s. As we always say, if you're listening to the audio version, try to see the video version, which we have on YouTube, which is our home base, but also on Spotify.
That's right. And don't forget, as usual, to subscribe, like, leave comments, and so on. That really helps. Yeah. All right. So yeah. We had. We also have to say that apart from Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, and Renault, who were sort of the FISA manufacturers, the rest of the teams really sided with FOCA, and that was another problem, because they felt that they were disenfranchised in this whole process. We're not gonna say that FOCA really was a good representative for the rights of these teams, because they were not. But at least in this power struggle, Bernie Ecclestone also managed to gain support from smaller teams, which was quite a big deal, right? Of course, one cannot imagine Formula One without Ferrari, right? That would be very, very difficult to imagine. But at the same time, kind of you still have quite a lot of, quite a lot of support from small teams, and kind of the numbers of teams that are supporting a particular entity was, of course, the balance was on FOCA's side here. Yes, and I think important, and I think we will come to this. Still, FOCA was not just a homogeneous group, as you saw the leadership quite British. So later, the smaller teams, for example, as Osella, like RDS, practically many of the occasions left the FOCA and more supported the FISA side. And later, if you hear interviews, for example, by RTS management, they complained
that they've been relegated by FOCA because they're not always agreed to all their decisions. So also it's not that black and white FISA FOCA. It's not manufacturers against the smaller Ford teams, for example.
Yeah, because I think initially the small teams thought that, okay, that they're gonna somehow benefit from FOCA. But then the outcome of this whole thing was that essentially Bernie Ecclestone became almost, you can say, a sole owner of broadcasting rights. And of course, this couldn't be this couldn't be in the best interest of any team. So essentially, I think they just got a little bit disappointed in this whole whole initiative. But initially he had this support, and that's important to remember.
Yeah. And so let's see a little bit history step by step. 1979, Canada was a very interesting race because first Niki Lauda announced his retirement. Secondly, Brabham replaced the Alfa Romeo engine with the Ford engine. And also the Grand Prix organizer, they asked Alfa Romeo, who just returned to the sport, to participate in the pre-qualification, what the team, for whatever reasons, refused. And after longer discussions, even if they not participated in the pre-qualification, at least the second driver, Vittorio Brambilla, was allowed to participate in the qualification, while Bruno Giacomelli, the number one driver, was not allowed to enter qualification and also was not allowed to start. And I see here we see already first discussions, conflicts between a manufacturer team and organizers, including FOCA.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
With this, we jump to the 1980s, Belgium and Monaco. So here, first, the FOCA affiliated teams had been advised to boycott the driver briefings at Belgium and Monaco Grand Prix because they had been made mandatory by the FISA president Jean-Marie Balestre earlier in February. But the FOCA's lawyers had notified that the requirement for drivers to attend had not been included in the rule book. A problem which I know, for example, from companies, you have rules, but somehow, unfortunately, the rules are not defined in the regulations. So you fight if it's valid or not valid. So in general, I may say if it's not inside the rule book, it's not mandatory from my personally legal interpretation here. Nevertheless, FISA issued fines of approximately $2,000, which have been much more money than it's today, to the drivers that did not attend the drivers' meeting at Belgium and Monaco. And on the other side, you may say, even if it's not inside the rule book, maybe it's a good idea to have such a drivers' meeting before a Grand Prix. But the drivers refused to pay this, and due to this, they have been threatened with the suspension of their driver's super license. And by May 29, prior to the first official practice of the Spain Grand Prix, it should mean, if you are seeing us on Grand Prix on YouTube, FISA had ordered the suspension of the racing license of 15 drivers. Which I mean is another, I think, a relevant point here. We are speaking about fights about money, but let's say often this was not really in the benefit for the fans. I mean, if it would be like this, that 15 drivers had not been able to start, this would not have been a nice experience for the spectators, not at the track directly, nor watching the races on TV. So let's say it didn't went that way, but if this also could have been practically destroying the whole sports.
Yeah, I just want to say that many people probably don't understand what we mean by drivers' meeting. And I just want to say that if you want to see what it looked like, there is a really great documentary on Ayrton Senna. It's not quite 1980s, of course, but in that film, you have a very cool example of a driver's meeting where Niki Lauda says that, oh, like we shouldn't race
Yes.
because it's dangerous. But if you want to see what it looked like, how the drivers are discussing various issues before a Grand Prix, this is a very good example of that. So watch the documentary called Senna. You can find this film really easily. It's available on many different platforms, and certainly worth watching just to understand what it looks like.
Agreed. So we had nearly the éclat at the Spanish Grand Prix, which of course wasn't well perceived by the organizers, including King Juan Carlos I had to intervene against FIFA's sanction because Spain, coming out of dictatorship, wanted to present itself as a modern country. So I had a big interest to have this Grand Prix going on. So they intervened, and with this, it was possible for everybody to start. And now we're coming to all the chaos here. First practice, Friday, first part, only participating the 3 manufacturers team, as the others in boycott against the FISA decision not participated. So we only saw on the track the Alfa Romeos, Ferraris, and Renault. Complete other picture then, first practice, second part, and here we only see the FOCA teams, Ligier, Williams, Brabham, McLaren, Lotus, ATS, Osella, Eros, Fittipaldi, Ensign, Shadow, and Ram Williams. And at the end, this was also as we saw on the track. So only the FOCA teams participated, but not the FISA teams. Important here, as I said, so slowly the boundaries are breaking up. The 2 Osella cars, they not participated on neither runs on Friday, so not, let's say, on the FISA qualification practice nor the FOCA session. But nevertheless, they could start in the race, but they not started under the name Osella, but as Team Denim Aftershave. Why they did so? Because 1980 they have been starting with Ford engine, but they already had been in discussions with Alfa Romeo. So this next year they would use the Alfa Romeo engines. So they not wanted to be perceived as bad with neither of the 2 organizations. So somehow had to find this way in between what they can do as a very small team. And I assume Osella was the smallest of all the teams there.
Yeah, but there is often like an inside joke that Osella was like the Switzerland of in this conflict. Like a small team trying to stay neutral throughout this whole process. But, again, because they took up the Alfa Romeo engine, it wasn't really an option for them. I mean, they eventually had to side with one of the sides. So,
right. And just as a fun fact, with Osella, we also had a second Enzo in Formula One, as its complete name is Enzo Osella. Okay, the race took place as we mentioned, only as the manufacturers teams not participated due to this decision. They protested later, and due to this, the results not became part of the official score for that year, but have been qualified mentioned as a non-official race. So no official points had been given in Spain that year.
Yeah, and that kind of, I think there was at that point sort of an attempt of a coup, right, to have kind of an independent organization of Formula One. Well, you can imagine that these thoughts have been in the air, but considering that, I think kind of one of the biggest chips of FISA was, of course, Ferrari team.
Right.
That sort of was there. And if you take Ferrari out, you are taking the majority of viewers out. So the audience of the sport is such that Ferrari fans are definitely one of the major groups that are watching, and making this whole broadcasting business really worthwhile for the advertisers. So therefore, if you kind of have a breakout between Alfa Romeo, Renault, and Ferrari, and the rest, then you can't really continue this. Like, it just wouldn't work. And that's why they reached this settlement, right, in 1981.
Yeah, and with this, 1982, and we are in South Africa, and we are shortly before the start of the season. Here, FISA had introduced a new clause into the drivers' super licenses, which they all had to sign or have to be able to start inside Formula One. And Niki Lauda, the computer, no surprise that it was him, of course, read all the provisions, even what may be printed out very, very small somewhere in the contract, hidden somewhere. And he was the one who detected the clause, I am committed to the above team to drive exclusively for them in the FIA World Championship until the season's conclusion. So this would take the possibility away for a driver to change inside the season from one team to another. And Niki Lauda called Didi Pironi, who was the head of that year of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, practically the drivers' labor's union, and they organized a meeting.
Also very famous meeting.
Yep. Now I see what happens. Sorry. So they did a meeting where they organized a strike. This first meeting, it wasn't, I think, really communicated as let's say, as what is the topic about, maybe to camouflage it a little bit, related to that FISA will not find out that early why they are meeting. So I think they somehow organized it as a small concert where Elio De Angelis was playing piano, what he was very good at. But here they spoke and they organized a strike, practically saying, if you don't take out this provision, we will not start in South Africa. Everybody was on board, only the person which you see on the photo, Theo Fabi, he was okay and was not supporting this strike, so to say. But anyway, it was quite successful. So FISA terminated this provision out of the contract.
Yeah, that's right. And essentially, it sort of the whole thing was resolved in favor of the drivers. Which, to be fair, does not very often happens these days.
Right.
Decisions in favor of labor union is not really something that you see a lot.
Yep. Other times. So with this, we are coming to Brazil. And here, both I think both Williams drivers have been disqualified. Nelson, sorry, not. It was Brabham and Williams driver, if I'm correct, Nelson Piquet and Keke Rosberg, because they have been found as underweight because they used something like a ballast water tank, which they thought is somehow a gray area inside the contract, which the officials said no. And due to this, both have been disqualified. At the end, and here again, also it shows a little bit that the classic boundaries are changing, because Brabham in 1980 was changing from the classic Ford to also to a turbo BMW engine. So somehow they're not have been this classic FOCA member anymore, as BMW, of course, is brought in not only engine but also a lot of money, and so somehow they've been like a semi-manufacturer team that year.
Yeah, so lots of intriguing events that we observe in this 1981 and 1982.
Exactly. And I think maybe the highlight of this FISA FOCA dispute war was 1982. So example, Long Beach, and here Ferrari aligned with FISA management. They understood that you can have like two rear wings. That's why they have this double rear wing, as you see on the car from Gilles Villeneuve. Gilles Villeneuve became third, but FIA disagreed with the Ferrari interpretation, also because of the pressure of the FOCA teams. And due to this, Gilles Villeneuve was disqualified after finishing third in Long Beach.
Yeah, which is a typical, quite typical, as we saw, before. If something is not in the rules, it doesn't mean that it's allowed. So, yeah.
Exactly. Ferrari agreed that they together have the legal size, but FIA said no, two wings are not possible. So this was what the lawyers at the end agreed with after the discussions. Then San Marino, Imola, and based on the FOCA boycotts in the San Marino series, all FOCA aligned teams were supposed to boycott the Grand Prix in Imola. In practice, 4 teams, they not participated in the boycott, and these are the Tyrrell, Osella, RTS, and Toulmin. So more the smaller teams understood that also FOCA, I mean, they are looking first of all for the benefit of the big FOCA teams, which maybe are Brabham, Williams, and McLaren. So it's maybe not always the benefit for the small teams. So they're not supported FOCA strikes that much anymore as such boycotts, which they later heavily complained that they've been harassed by FOCA, meaning they not got prize money as they hoped they would receive based on the calculations which FOCA made. So again, it's not really only black, white, FISA, FOCA, but there are a lot of small battles in between.
Yeah, that's right. It's like everyone is fighting against everyone else.
Right.
But again,
So,
it's mostly economic disputes, so it's all about sort of the revenue, right? How the revenue is divided ultimately.
Exactly. So 82 was, I think, more or less the high point of this, and then finally we came to a resolution, and I think we already discussed it at the end. It meant more money for the FOCA teams, to resume it in short.
Yeah, that's right. So essentially, but yeah, we need to say that it doesn't mean that there was a resolution. There's kind of constant, I think, at the beginning
Yes,
of each
right.
season. There is currently even this negotiations of who is in control of broadcasting, what happens with the prize money, how the revenue is split, and then also if there are any new regulations from FIA that are coming that year. Again, there are huge disputes about how to interpret these regulations. So it's a constant process. So I think that also we need to say here that this signifies the increase in maturity of the sport. So previously, like when it started, it was just kind of one person, one car operation. Anybody could go out if they had funds and buy a car and participate. Now it's professional teams, but now on top of the professional teams, we also have these institutions. And the institutions are kind of the organizers of two types. One organizer that controls the rules and how the organizationally, this competition is conducted, and the other is mostly kind of a money-making controller that looks after the revenues from broadcasting and advertising, which is also an important part because you do need money to build a Formula One car. It's a very expensive business. So, ultimately, in 1980s, we saw these institutions formed, and then there is a power struggle between them.
Right. And as you said, this was maybe a resolution for the moment, for the big topics.
It's a temporary ceasefire.
There have been various fires still on, various battles. For example, 1990s, I remember SVC Enzo Ferrari on the photo. Ferrari was unhappy with the money they received, or unhappy that they have been asked to receive less money, and they threatened FIA, including Bernie Ecclestone, with leaving. They already developed an IndyCar Ferrari car just to really show how serious they are considering leaving Formula One. So there have been battles all over the next years, and I'm sure we are coming back to such topics.
Yeah, that's right. Like I said, it was just a temporary ceasefire, and we see these conflicts re-emerging. And again, this is about who controls the pots of money and who controls the influence, who is the most influential in swinging the teams and drivers to their side.
Yeah. Okay, so this was an episode about politics, one-off, because it was really a relevant topic for the 1980s, and I hope, and we hope it helps you a little bit to understand why we had the different discussions going on in the 1980s. And again, it shaped the sport differently, and it would be different today if we wouldn't had this FISA FOCA dispute in the 80s.
Yes, and again, you have to understand that FIA has a big influence on constructors because they define the rules and regulations, and the FOCA obviously. Here, controlling the broadcasting budgets, which is also an important component for many teams.
Yeah. So just to add to your thought, sorry. I mean, again, we see the boundaries are blurring. So even if you speak about Williams, if you speak about McLaren, today these companies are also manufacturers. Of course, they're just selling very limited numbers of their super sports car, but practically Williams, McLaren, they also became manufacturers.
Yes, I just wanted to say that we will keep coming back to these disputes because as we go along, there will be more and more of various political things happening at the beginning of the season, a lot more than we saw in previous years that we already discussed. Now we are in 1980s, but as we go along, we will keep coming back to this topic. Meanwhile, thanks a lot for being with us today. Again, if we missed something, let us know, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.